From building PayPal and SpaceX to running one of the world's most disruptive automobile companies, Elon Musk has a number of impressive accomplishments under his belt. I admire people like Elon Musk who do things that no one else is doing, and I always feel curious to know about their way of thinking, their mindset and their thought process. Hi guys, this is Pratik, you are watching Eclectic, and in this video we are going to talk about a particular way of thinking, to which Elon calls the most powerful way of thinking. So let us see what is it and how we can use that process in our day-to-day lives. I have already made a 5-episode series on Elon Musk's biography. If you are interested, go check it out after watching this video. Throughout our history, various thinkers, philosophers, psychologists and scientists have recommended various thought processes and decision-making strategies. From all of these strategies, Elon Musk follows a 2000-year-old strategy. In a 2013 TED Talk, the billionaire entrepreneur revealed his secret sauce to achieving extraordinary things. This strategy is called the first principles thinking, a decision-making strategy in which you boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there, as opposed to reasoning by analogy. Reasoning by analogy is a simple process where we draw conclusion by comparing two things. On the other hand, first principle thinking is a tough one. The term first principles was coined more than 2000 years ago by the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, who believed that the best way to understand a subject is to break it down to its most fundamental principles, or in other words, breaking down things to their most basic forms. For example, if you see a computer, think about what is it made of, think of its different parts, then ask yourself what material is used to make these parts. Keep digging and you will find out how important the rare earth elements are in manufacturing electronics. Here is an example of first principles thinking from Elon himself.
And then I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me too type ideas.
Yeah,
Slight
iterations
yeah.
on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb. You know, it's like you can't say, oh, you know, horses, nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place, and you know there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never gonna get cars.
Right.
And for batteries, they would say, oh, it's going to cost, you know, historically it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, what if we bought that in the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much cheaper than anyone realizes.
So the first principles thinking requires you to dig deeper and deeper until you are left with only the foundational truths of a situation. René Descartes, the French philosopher and scientist, embraced this approach with a method now called Cartesian Doubt, in which he would systematically doubt everything he could possibly doubt until he was left with what he saw as purely indubitable truths. Now, how we can use first principles method to invent new things and also to live a better life? Many of the most groundbreaking ideas in history have been a result of boiling things down to the first principles. and then substituting a more effective solution for one of the key parts. For instance, Johannes Gutenberg combined the technology of a screw press, a device used for making wine, with a movable type, paper and ink to create the printing press. Movable type had been used for centuries, but Gutenberg was the first person to consider the constituent parts of the process and adapt technology from an entirely different field to make printing far more efficient. The result was a world-changing innovation and the widespread distribution of information for the first time in the history. First principles thinking helps you to cobble together information from different disciplines to create new ideas and innovations. Because all of our innovations are interdependent, it is impossible to manufacture vehicles and electronics without having a mining industry which mines metals. And to use vehicles and electronics, we need energy industry to provide energy. In theory, it sounds easy, but in reality, it is quite difficult to practice. One of the primary obstacles to first principles thinking is our tendency to optimize form rather than function. If I ask you to visualize or envision the future of your laptop, most of you would think about how laptop would look like in the future. You will quickly try to imagine how its shape and size would change in the future. Small, broad, wide, different types of screens and keyboards, etc. So when asked to envision the future of laptop, we tend to visualize how laptop would look in the future, how its form would change over time. But to be able to invent something new and extraordinary, we need to think about how would laptop's functions evolve. Focusing on function is more important than thinking about its form. The story of the suitcase provides a perfect example. In ancient Rome, soldiers used leather messenger bags and satchels to carry food while riding across the countryside. At the same time, the Romans had many vehicles with wheels, like chariots, carriages, and wagons. And yet, for thousands of years, nobody thought to combine the bag and the wheel. The first rolling suitcase was not invented until 1970, when Bernard Shadow was hauling his luggage through an airport and saw a worker rolling a heavy machine on a wheeled skid. Throughout the 1800s and 1900s, leather bags were specialized for particular uses: backpacks for school, rucksacks for hiking, suitcases for travel. Zippers were added to bags in 1938. Nylon backpacks were first sold in 1967. Despite these improvements, the form of the bag remained largely the same. Innovators spent all of their time and energy on making slight iterations or changes on the same theme. Therefore, the improvements of the core function is important. While everyone else was focused on how to build a better looking bag, hence focusing on form, Bernard Shadow considered how to store and move things more efficiently by focusing on the function. So optimize the function, ignore the form. I am not trying to say that continuous improvements are not useful. All I am trying to say is sometimes look where no one is looking. First principles thinking does not remove the need for continuous improvement, but it does alter the direction of improvement. Without reasoning by first principles, you spend your time making small improvements to something rather than inventing something groundbreaking. If you want to enhance an existing process or a belief, continuous improvement is a great option. But if you want to learn how to think for yourself and come up with new ideas, reasoning from first principles is one of the best ways to do it. First principles and your personal life. First principles thinking isn't just for building rockets or electric vehicles. It can be used to fix problems in your daily life, whether it is related to your personal relationships, work, finances, or anything else. With the help of first principles, tracing your problems back to their source becomes easier. Too often we make major life decisions based on outdated or false information, but in a rapidly changing world, historical truths and experience may not always work, which is why it is sometimes necessary to take a step back and use the first principles approach to find out the source of your problems and then creating a more customized and creative solution. Elon Musk is an inspiration to many around the world. He has been described as the most imaginative business magnate of the 21st century. The life of such a talented personality gives us an opportunity to learn a few lessons that we can apply in our life too. Therefore, I decided to create a playlist of YouTube videos that are based on Elon's childhood, his working style, and how he deals with his various businesses. This playlist consists of videos that are made by some of the best educational YouTube channels out there. Go check it out, link is in the description down below. On my channel, I make videos on our past, present and the future, which involves dealing with the history, philosophy, politics and the future tech. Go ahead, check out the playlist and videos that are already available. Subscribe if you find them interesting, and also I assure you that more interesting content will keep coming up. If it is possible for you, economically support my channel on patreon.com.